The morning light filtered through the crystal chandelier in the Whitmore mansion's foyer, casting prismatic shadows across the Italian marble floor I'd polished just yesterday. 25 years I'd been crossing this threshold at dawn, my worn sneakers silent against stone that cost more than my entire year's salary. 25 years of invisible hands keeping this palace pristine, of being the ghost that made their lives run smoothly. But today, everything was different. Eleanor. Mrs. Catherine Whitmore's voice cut through the morning stillness like a blade. She stood at the top of the curved staircase, her silk Hermes robe flowing behind her like something out of an old Hollywood film. But there was nothing glamorous about the expression on her face. Pure venom, that's what I saw. After a quarter-century of service, of loyalty that bordered on devotion, she was looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off the bottom of her Louboutin heels. I set down my cleaning caddy, my hand steady despite the ice forming in my stomach. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore? She descended the stairs with deliberate slowness, each step echoing in the cavernous entrance hall. Behind her, I could see other figures emerging, Mr. Gregory Whitmore in his tailored suit, already dressed for his morning board meeting. Their son, Marcus, 28 years old now but still carrying the sullen expression of a spoiled teenager. And behind them, uniformed officers. 2 of them, their badges catching the morning light. My heart lurched. Police. In all my years here, through countless parties, family dramas, and late-night emergencies, I'd never seen police cross this threshold. Don't play innocent with me, Catherine hissed as she reached the bottom step. She was close enough now that I could smell her Chanel No. 5, the same perfume I'd been buying her for Christmas gifts with money I could barely spare. My diamond necklace. The one from the benefit gala. It's missing. Missing? I kept my voice calm, though my pulse was hammering. Mrs. Whitmore, I haven't seen any necklace. When did you last? Don't. Her fingers stabbed toward me like an accusation made flesh. Don't you dare try to spin this. I know you took it, Eleanor. 25 years of playing the faithful servant, and now I see what you really are. A thief. A common thief who's been waiting for the perfect opportunity. The words hit me like physical blows. Thief. That single word, heavy with judgment and finality. I, who had raised this woman's son when she was too busy with charity luncheons and spa appointments. I, who had held little Marcus through fevered dreams when he was 7 and she was in Cabo. I, who had cleaned up Gregory's drunken messes, had kept their secrets, had been the invisible mortar holding this family's crumbling facade together. Mrs. Whitmore, I would never, I began, but she wasn't finished. Officer Monroe, she called over her shoulder, her eyes never leaving mine. I want her bag searched. And I want her arrested. The younger of the 2 officers stepped forward, his expression uncomfortable. He was maybe 30, with kind eyes that seemed apologetic even as he reached for my worn canvas tote bag. Ma'am, I need to search your belongings. Do you consent? What choice did I have? I nodded, mute, as he upended my bag onto that pristine marble floor. The contents of my small life scattered across stone worth more than everything I owned, my blood pressure medication, the photo of my granddaughter Emma in her graduation gown, my bus pass, a protein bar I'd been saving for lunch, my reading glasses with the cracked frame I'd been meaning to replace for 2 years. And there, gleaming obscenely among my humble possessions, a diamond necklace. The room seemed to tilt. I stared at that glittering snake of precious stones, and even as my mind reeled, a terrible clarity descended. I knew that necklace. It was the one from 3 years ago, the one Catherine had worn to the Metropolitan Museum Gala, the one she'd shown off to every camera that would photograph her. And I knew something else too, something I'd learned quite by accident when cleaning out the trash from her private study. That necklace was a fake. Well, Catherine's voice dripped with vindication. What do you have to say now, Eleanor? I looked up at her, this woman I'd served faithfully through the best and worst of times, and something inside me cracked. Not my spirit, no, that was still intact. It was the chain of obligation, of desperate gratitude, of believing that loyalty meant anything to people who saw you as furniture. That's what broke. But I didn't speak. I simply stared at her, my face a mask I'd perfected over decades of swallowing words, of biting back truths, of being the good, quiet help who knew her place. Cat got your tongue? Marcus sneered from the staircase. This boy, man, I had to remind myself, whom I'd taught to tie his shoes, whose nightmares I'd soothed, who'd once told me I was like a second mother to him. He couldn't even meet my eyes. The officer pulled out his handcuffs with obvious reluctance. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. As the cold metal closed around my wrists, I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching this happen to someone else. Catherine stood there, arms crossed, satisfaction radiating from her like heat. Gregory had the decency to look uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to intervene. Never uncomfortable enough for that. 25 years, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. But in that vast marble hall, it carried. 25 years I've served this family. And 25 years you've been planning this, apparently, Catherine shot back. Officer, I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I want her to understand that you don't steal from the Whitmores and get away with it. As they led me toward the door, that same door I'd entered thousands of times before dawn, that door I'd polished until the brass gleamed, that door that had been my portal into a world so different from my own, I turned back one last time. My eyes found Marcus again, and this time he met my gaze. For just a second, I saw something flicker there. Guilt? Shame? But it vanished quickly, replaced by the carefully cultivated indifference of the entitled. You're making a mistake, I said quietly. Not to Catherine, not to Gregory, not even to Marcus. To all of them. To this house. To the ghost of who I'd been for the past quarter century. A terrible mistake. Catherine laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the walls. The only mistake was trusting you for so long. Get her out of my house. The squad car smelled like disinfectant and desperation. As we pulled away from the Whitmore mansion, that sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, with its manicured gardens and its swimming pool shaped like a grand piano, I watched it recede in the side mirror. All those windows I'd cleaned, all those rooms I'd kept perfect, all those secrets I'd kept buried. But buried things have a way of rising to the surface. The police station was everything you'd expect, fluorescent lights that hummed with exhausted energy, the smell of burnt coffee, the sound of phones ringing and keyboards clattering. They processed me with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd done this 10,000 times before. Fingerprints. Mugshot. Personal effects in a manila envelope. The holding cell was small and cold, with a metal bench bolted to the wall and a toilet that had seen better days. There were 2 other women there already, one young, probably not even 20, with mascara streaking down her cheeks, the other middle-aged like me, but harder, with eyes that suggested this wasn't her first time in such accommodations. I sat on the far end of the bench and closed my eyes. Not to sleep, I knew sleep wouldn't come, but to think. To remember. To piece together the puzzle that had been assembling itself in the back of my mind for months now. 3 years ago, Catherine had been in her study late at night, on the phone. I'd been upstairs changing the linens in the guest room, they were expecting visitors that weekend, and her voice had carried up through the heating vents. It was an old house for all its grandeur, and sound traveled in unexpected ways. Yes, I understand it's irregular, she'd been saying, her tone sharp with stress. But I need the cash now. The certificate of authenticity is in the safe. No, Gregory doesn't know. He can't know. Just make it look exactly the same. He'll never notice the difference. At the time, I'd dismissed it. The wealthy had their eccentricities, their private dealings that weren't my concern. I'd learned long ago that the best housekeepers were deaf to certain conversations, blind to certain transactions. But the next week, when I'd been emptying the trash from that same study, I'd found it, a certificate from Goldsmith and Associates jewelers, dated and signed, certifying that one diamond necklace was in fact a high-quality cubic zirconia replica. I'd stared at that paper for a long moment, understanding washing over me. Catherine had sold her real diamond necklace, the one Gregory had given her for their 20th anniversary, insured for $500,000, and replaced it with a fake. Why? Gambling debts, most likely. I'd seen the credit card statements she'd thrown away, the ones from those business trips to Atlantic City and Vegas. And I'd kept that certificate. Not for any malicious reason, at least, that's what I told myself. I'd simply photographed it with my phone before throwing it away, filing it in the mental drawer labeled things that are none of my business but might matter someday. Today was someday. The night in that holding cell was the longest of my life. The young girl cried softly for hours. The hard-eyed woman slept like the dead, snoring occasionally. And I sat there, back straight, hands folded in my lap, my mind working through the implications of what was happening. Catherine had planted that necklace in my bag. Of that, I was certain. She needed someone to blame for a theft that hadn't actually occurred, because she was planning to claim the insurance money. $500,000. And who better to frame than the loyal housekeeper? The invisible servant who could be sacrificed without consequence? But Catherine had made one crucial error. She'd assumed that being invisible meant being powerless. She'd assumed that 25 years of quiet service meant I was simple, that I was blind, that I was deaf to the truths that whispered through that house like ghosts. She had no idea what I knew. What I'd seen. What I'd kept. Morning came with watery light through the high windows of the cell. A guard brought us stale coffee and dry bagels. My cellmates were called out for processing, bail posted, charges filed, the gears of justice grinding forward. And then, finally, my name. Eleanor Hartley. You've got a visitor. I stood, my joints protesting after hours on that unforgiving bench, and followed the guard down a maze of corridors to a small consultation room. I expected a public defender, someone overworked and underpaid who would try their best but ultimately couldn't compete with the Whitmores' expensive lawyers. Instead, I found Walter Chen. Walter had been the Whitmores' driver for 15 years before retiring 5 years ago. He was in his late 60s now, with silver hair and the kind eyes of someone who'd seen too much of the world's cruelty but refused to let it make him cruel in return. We'd been allies of a sort, two invisible people who kept that household running, who knew things we were never supposed to acknowledge. Eleanor, he said, standing as I entered. His suit was neat but not expensive. I heard what happened. Walter. I felt tears prick my eyes for the first time since this nightmare began. What are you doing here? Posting your bail, he said simply. I've got the money. It's not much in the scheme of things, but it's enough to get you out of here. Walter, you can't. I can and I will. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit down, Eleanor. We need to talk. I sat, my hands trembling now that someone was being kind to me. Funny how cruelty you can endure with a straight face, but kindness breaks you every time. I know what Catherine's doing, Walter said quietly. I don't know all the details, but I know that woman well enough. This is about money, isn't it? Some scheme she's running? I looked at him carefully. Could I trust him? But then, what choice did I have? I was alone in this fight, and Walter was offering a hand. Sometimes you have to take the hand that's offered. It's about a necklace, I began. The one from the Met Gala. The real one was sold 3 years ago. What she reported stolen was a fake. Walter's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't look surprised. She's claiming insurance fraud and pinning it on you. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the scarred table between us. Then he smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for payback. Eleanor, in my 15 years with that family, I saw things. Heard things. But I was just the driver, so I kept my mouth shut and did my job. But I never forgot. He leaned forward. Do you have proof? About the necklace? I have a photograph of the certificate of authenticity for the fake. It's on my phone. Which the police confiscated. Which is backed up to the cloud. I can access it from any device. Walter's smile widened. Then, my dear Eleanor, I think it's time we reminded the Whitmores that invisible doesn't mean powerless. Within 2 hours, I was out of that cell, processed and released on bail that Walter paid without hesitation. The fresh air outside the police station tasted like freedom and fury mixed together. I stood on the steps, breathing it in, feeling the weight of my decision settling over me like armor. For 25 years, I'd been quiet. I'd been good. I'd been invisible. Not anymore. Walter drove me to his apartment, a modest place in Stamford with worn furniture and family photos on every surface. His wife, Linda, greeted me with a hug and hot tea and didn't ask any questions. They gave me their guest room and privacy, and I sat on the bed with Walter's laptop, staring at the login screen for my cloud storage. My finger hovered over the keyboard. Once I did this, there was no going back. I would be declaring war on people with more money, more power, more resources than I could ever dream of having. They could bury me in legal fees. They could destroy my reputation. They could make sure I never worked again. But they'd already done that, hadn't they? By calling me a thief. By having me arrested. By throwing away 25 years of loyalty like it was garbage. I logged in. The photograph was exactly where I'd left it, filed away in a folder I'd labeled important documents. The certificate was clear, the jeweler's signature visible, the date unmistakable. Proof that the necklace Catherine was claiming had been stolen was actually a fake she'd commissioned herself. But that wasn't all I had. I scrolled through the folder, looking at files I'd accumulated over the years without really planning to. The invoice for Marcus's diploma from Ashford University, a diploma mill that had been shut down by the Department of Education 2 years ago. The credit card statements showing Catherine's gambling losses. The emails I'd accidentally seen on the printer, forgotten and left there, showing Gregory's affair with his secretary. The records of charitable donations that had actually been funneled into Catherine's personal accounts. 25 years of being invisible had taught me one crucial lesson: people are careless with their secrets when they don't think anyone's watching. I selected the files carefully, creating a new folder. Then I composed an email. Not to Catherine, she wouldn't care about proof or truth. No, this email was going to someone who would care very much indeed. Gregory Whitmore's personal email address, the one he used for business, the one I'd seen 1,000 times when I'd organized his study and tidied his desk. The subject line was simple: truth. The body of the email was even simpler: when you throw out the trash, you also throw out the secrets it contains. Perhaps it's time we cleaned house properly. And then I attached the files. All of them. My finger hovered over the send button for only a second. Then I clicked it. The message sent with a soft whoosh that felt far too quiet for something so explosive. I closed the laptop and sat back on the bed, my heart pounding. What I'd just done couldn't be undone. In less than an hour, Gregory Whitmore would open that email, probably from his office in Manhattan, probably during a brief break between meetings. He would see the proof of his wife's fraud, his son's fake credentials, his own infidelity documented in his own careless words. And then, the house of cards would begin to fall. A knock at the door made me jump. Walter poked his head in, his expression concerned. "You okay in here?" "I just declared war," I said quietly. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Good. That family's been asking for it for years. What do we do now?" "Now?" I stood up, smoothing down my worn slacks. "Now we wait. The bomb's been planted. It's just a matter of time before it goes off." Walter grinned. "Want some dinner while we wait for the explosion?" Despite everything, I found myself smiling back. That sounds perfect. Gregory Whitmore's day had started like any other Tuesday. Morning workout with his personal trainer at 6, protein shake at 6:45, driver picking him up at 7:30 sharp for the commute into Manhattan. By 8:15, he was at his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Preston Building, overlooking Central Park, coffee steaming on his desk as he prepared for a 9 o'clock board meeting. He almost didn't open the email. The subject line, "Truth," seemed like spam, probably some philosophical newsletter he'd accidentally subscribed to. But the sender's address made him pause, a generic Gmail account, E.J. Hartley 1969. It took him a moment to place it, and when he did, his brow furrowed. Eleanor? Their housekeeper sending him emails? In 25 years, she'd never contacted him directly about anything. All household matters went through Catherine. Curious now, he clicked it open. The message was brief, almost cryptic. But it was the attachments that made his blood run cold. 6 files, each labeled with clinical precision, necklace_certificate.jpg, Marcus_diploma_invoice.pdf, cc_statements_2024.pdf, personal_correspondence.pdf, charity_audit_discrepancy.xlsx, insurance_policy_details.pdf. His hand was shaking as he clicked the first file. The certificate loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, and Gregory felt his world tilt on its axis. Goldsmith and Associates Jewelers, certifying that one diamond necklace, the exact specifications matching Catherine's anniversary gift, was actually cubic zirconia. Dated 3 years ago. Signed and notarized. "No," he whispered to his empty office. "No, no, no." But there was more. He clicked through the files with growing horror. Marcus's diploma, purchased from a degree mill for $15,000. Catherine's credit card statements showing $200,000 in gambling losses over the past 18 months, losses he'd known nothing about. And then the emails. His own emails, the ones he'd written to Jennifer, his secretary, the ones full of promises and endearments and plans to meet at the Ritz-Carlton. How did Eleanor have these? How long had she been collecting them? And then, with a sickening lurch, he understood. Catherine's frantic call yesterday about the stolen necklace. The police. Eleanor being arrested. This wasn't about a theft at all. This was a setup. And Eleanor knew it. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Whitmore? The board members are waiting in the conference room." Gregory stared at his computer screen, at the evidence of his family's collective fraud and deception, and made a decision. Cancel the meeting. Tell them I have a family emergency. And get me Catherine on the phone. Now. Catherine was at the salon, in the middle of her weekly blowout, when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. Gregory knew better than to interrupt her beauty appointments, but something in the persistence of the call made her signal to Victor to pause the dryer. "This better be important, darling," she said, her tone light and careless. How long were you planning to keep it from me? Gregory's voice was ice. Catherine's stomach dropped. Keep what from you? The necklace, Catherine. The real necklace. The one you sold 3 years ago and replaced with a fake. Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you just going to collect the insurance money and hope I never found out? The salon seemed to recede around her. Catherine gripped the armrest of the styling chair, her knuckles white. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't. His voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare lie to me. I have the certificate right here. From the jeweler. Certifying that your necklace is cubic zirconia. I have your credit card statements showing $200,000 in gambling losses. I have the invoice for Marcus's fake diploma. I have everything, Catherine. Every single thing. Where? She swallowed hard, her mind racing. Where did you get that? Eleanor sent it to me. Eleanor. The woman you had arrested yesterday. The woman you've been setting up to take the fall for your insurance fraud. Catherine felt the world dropping away beneath her. Impossible. Eleanor was just the help, just the quiet little mouse who cleaned and cooked and never said a word. How could she possibly? And then she remembered. All the times she'd thrown papers in the trash. All the times she'd left sensitive documents on her desk, never imagining that anyone would care or understand. All the times she'd had conversations on the phone, never thinking that someone might be listening. 25 years of invisible presence. 25 years of underestimating the woman who knew every corner of their lives. Gregory, listen to me. No. You listen. I'm coming home. Right now. And when I get there, you're going to tell me everything. And then we're calling our lawyers. Not to prosecute Eleanor. To protect ourselves from the shitstorm you've created. The line went dead. Catherine sat in that salon chair, Victor staring at her with concern, other clients pretending not to listen while hanging on every word, and felt something she hadn't felt in decades, genuine fear. Meanwhile, in Walter's modest apartment, I was washing dishes after lunch when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Eleanor Hartley? A woman's voice, professional and crisp. Speaking. This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Connecticut State Police, Insurance Fraud Division. I understand you were arrested yesterday on charges of theft. I'd like to speak with you about those charges, if you have time. My heart hammered. Am I being charged with additional crimes? No, ma'am. Actually, quite the opposite. We received some interesting information this morning regarding the alleged theft. Information that suggests the complaint against you may have been fraudulent. Would you be willing to come down to the station and make a statement? I looked at Walter, who'd appeared in the kitchen doorway at the sound of my voice. He nodded encouragingly. Yes, I said. I'll come down right away. The Insurance Fraud Division operated out of a different building than the local police, a nondescript office complex in Hartford. Detective Morrison was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of my daughter. She led me to an interview room, much more comfortable than the holding cell I'd occupied the night before, and offered me coffee, which I accepted gratefully. Mrs. Hartley, she began, settling into her chair with a thick file folder. Someone sent our office an anonymous tip this morning. Along with that tip were several documents that raised serious questions about the theft reported by Catherine Whitmore. Anonymous? I asked innocently. Detective Morrison's lips quirked slightly. Anonymous. The documents included a certificate of authenticity for a cubic zirconia necklace, matching the description of the supposedly stolen item. They also included copies of insurance policies, credit card statements, and other financial records suggesting a pattern of financial distress and questionable activities. She opened the folder and spread several pages across the table. I recognized them immediately, the same files I'd sent to Gregory, now apparently in the hands of law enforcement. Based on this evidence, we've opened an investigation into Catherine Whitmore for insurance fraud. The charges against you are being dropped. She paused, studying my face. Mrs. Hartley, I need to ask you directly, did you send these documents? I met her eyes steadily. Detective, I've worked for the Whitmore family for 25 years. In that time, I've seen many things, heard many conversations, found many documents that were carelessly discarded. When Mrs. Whitmore accused me of theft, I realized that perhaps those documents might be relevant to establishing the truth. So you did collect this information. I took photographs of documents I found in the household trash, yes. Is that illegal? Detective Morrison sat back in her chair. That's a complicated question. Generally speaking, once something is thrown away, it's considered abandoned property. You didn't steal these documents, they were discarded. And you didn't use them for blackmail or personal gain. You used them to defend yourself against false accusations. She smiled slightly. Some might call that remarkably good timing. Some might call it being prepared for betrayal, I replied softly. Indeed. She gathered the papers back into the folder. We'll need you to provide a formal statement. Everything you know about the Whitmore household finances, the necklace, any conversations you overheard. This is going to be a significant case, Mrs. Hartley. The Whitmores are prominent people with expensive lawyers. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Catherine's face as she called me a thief. About Marcus turning away, unable to meet my eyes. About 25 years of being treated as furniture, valuable only for my usefulness. Detective Morrison, I said, I've spent a quarter-century being afraid of losing my job, of disappointing my employers, of not being good enough. I'm done being afraid. Whatever comes next, I'm prepared. She nodded approvingly. Then let's get your statement on record. The statement took 3 hours. I told them everything. The phone conversation I'd overheard 3 years ago, finding the certificate in the trash, Catherine's gambling habits, the suspicious timing of the theft right before a major insurance payout. I told them about being arrested, about the necklace planted in my bag, about the look in Catherine's eyes when she'd called me a thief. When I was finally done, my throat was dry and my hands were cramping from signing forms. But I felt lighter than I had in years. Detective Morrison walked me out personally. Mrs. Hartley, I want you to know, we see cases like this more often than you'd think. Wealthy people assuming the help is too stupid or too scared to fight back. I'm glad you proved them wrong. So am I said. Walter was waiting in the lobby, and we drove back to Stamford in companionable silence. But as we pulled up to his apartment building, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a name that made my breath catch, Gregory Whitmore. I answered it on speakerphone so Walter could hear. Eleanor. Gregory's voice was rough, exhausted. Eleanor, I need to speak with you. In person. Please. Mr. Whitmore, I don't think that's a good idea. I know. I know everything you must think of me, of this family. But please. Give me 1 hour. Name the place. I'll come alone. I looked at Walter, who shrugged. The decision was mine. Something in Gregory's voice, some genuine desperation, made me pause. He'd never been actively cruel to me, just passively complicit in his wife's treatment. Maybe he deserved a chance to explain. Or maybe I just wanted to see his face when he realized how thoroughly his world had collapsed. The Starbucks on Main Street in Stamford. 1 hour. I hung up before he could respond. Walter raised an eyebrow. You sure about this? No. But I'm doing it anyway. Gregory Whitmore looked 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. His suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, his hair, usually impeccably styled, falling across his forehead in disarray. He spotted me immediately when he entered the coffee shop, and the expression on his face was one I'd never seen before: shame. He bought 2 coffees without asking what I wanted. After 25 years, he knew I took mine black, and sat down across from me in the corner booth I'd chosen. Eleanor. He set the coffee in front of me with shaking hands. I don't even know where to begin. Perhaps with an apology, I suggested quietly. An apology doesn't begin to cover it. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of defeat. I've spent the last 6 hours with lawyers, with accountants, with investigators. Do you know what I learned? That my wife has been systematically defrauding our insurance company, our charitable foundation, and probably half a dozen other entities for years. That my son's entire education is a lie. That everything I thought I knew about my family was a carefully constructed facade. And you never suspected? He looked at me with hollow eyes. I didn't want to see it. Catherine's spending, Marcus's laziness, the little inconsistencies that didn't quite add up, I ignored all of it because it was easier than confronting the truth. I was a coward, Eleanor. And I let that cowardice turn into cruelty when I stood by and watched her have you arrested. I sipped my coffee, letting him sit with his guilt. He deserved to feel it. The charges against you have been dropped, he continued. Detective Morrison called me. They're building a case against Catherine for insurance fraud. She'll be arrested, probably tomorrow. Marcus is being investigated by his employer. When they find out his degree is fake, he'll be fired. And me. He laughed bitterly. I'm complicit in all of it by willful blindness. What do you want from me, Mr. Whitmore? I want to make this right. As right as it can be made, anyway. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. This is a check for $250,000. It's your severance pay, back pay for every overtime hour you worked without compensation, and compensation for emotional distress. There's also a letter of recommendation that makes it clear you left our employment in excellent standing, and my personal assurance that if Catherine tries to pursue any legal action against you, I will testify on your behalf. I stared at the envelope without touching it. $250,000. More money than I'd make in 5 years of housekeeping. Maybe more than I'd make in 10. I also want you to know, Gregory continued, his voice breaking slightly, that I called my lawyer this morning and filed for divorce. Catherine and I are done. I can't be married to someone who would do what she did to you. Who would betray my trust, steal from charities, and then frame an innocent woman to cover her tracks. And Marcus? Marcus is 28 years old. He made his own choices. He participated in your arrest, Eleanor. He could have spoken up, and he didn't. I'm cutting him off financially until he proves he can earn something honestly. Gregory's eyes were red-rimmed. I know none of this fixes what happened. I know money doesn't erase the humiliation of being arrested, of being called a thief, of having 25 years of loyalty thrown in your face. But it's all I can offer. I picked up the envelope slowly, feeling its weight. Inside was the means to retire comfortably, to help my daughter with her mortgage, to set up a college fund for my granddaughter Emma. Inside was security I'd never dreamed of having. But more than that, inside was acknowledgement. Validation. Proof that my years of service had meant something, even if it took a catastrophe to make anyone see it. Mr. Whitmore, I said carefully, I appreciate this. I do. But I need you to understand something. I'm not accepting this money as payment for my silence or my forgiveness. I'm accepting it because I earned it. Every single dollar. Not just in the last 25 years, but in the last 48 hours when I had to fight for my freedom and my dignity against people who should have valued both. I understand. I don't think you do. Not yet. But maybe someday you will. I stood up, tucking the envelope into my purse. There's one more thing I need from you. Anything. When Catherine is arrested, I want to be there. I want to see her face when she realizes that the invisible woman she tried to destroy is the reason she's losing everything. Gregory flinched but nodded. I'll make sure you're informed when it happens. I left him sitting there in that coffee shop, a broken man contemplating the ruins of his life. And I felt, not satisfaction, exactly. Something more complex. Justice, maybe. Or just the cold comfort of knowing that actions have consequences, even for the wealthy and powerful. The next day, at precisely 11:30 in the morning, Detective Morrison called to let me know that officers were executing an arrest warrant at the Whitmore mansion. She asked if I wanted to be present. I said yes. Walter drove me there, parking across the street from the estate that had been my workplace for a quarter-century. We watched as 2 squad cars pulled into the circular driveway, as officers approached the front door that I had polished so many times. Catherine answered in yoga pants and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, clearly not expecting company. Through the mansion's front windows, those huge windows I'd cleaned every week, I watched her face cycle through confusion, then outrage, then stark terror as the officers showed her the warrant. She looked around wildly, perhaps for Gregory, perhaps for Marcus, perhaps for anyone who would save her. But the house was empty except for her. Gregory was at his lawyer's office, finalizing divorce papers. Marcus was in the city, being terminated from his job. No one was coming to rescue her. As they led her out in handcuffs, those same handcuffs I'd worn just 2 days ago, her eyes swept across the street. And she saw me. Saw me sitting in Walter's car, watching her humiliation with the same detached calm she'd shown watching mine. Our eyes met across that manicured lawn, across the chasm of class and privilege that had always separated us. And I saw, in that moment, that she finally understood. The invisible woman had been watching all along. The silent servant had been listening all along. The powerless employee had been preparing all along. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just watched as they put her in the back of the squad car, as they drove away with her future in ruins, as the mansion stood empty and silent behind them. Feel better? Walter asked quietly. I thought about it honestly. No, I admitted. But I feel free. That evening, back at Walter's apartment with Linda fussing over me with homemade lasagna and garlic bread, my phone rang one final time. Marcus Whitmore. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Eleanor. His voice was thick, like he'd been crying. Eleanor, I need to talk to you. Please don't hang up. Talk. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. When Mom accused you, when they arrested you, I knew it was wrong. I knew you'd never steal anything. But I just stood there. Like a coward. Yes, I agreed simply. You did. I lost my job today. They found out about the diploma. And Dad cut me off. I don't have anything, Eleanor. No money, no job, no prospects. I'm staying at a friend's apartment, sleeping on his couch. He laughed hollowly. Karma, right? What do you want from me, Marcus? I don't know. Forgiveness, maybe? Or just. I just wanted you to know that I realize now what you meant to this family. What you did for us, for me, all those years. And how badly we failed you. I closed my eyes, remembering the little boy who used to run to me after school, excited to tell me about his day. Remembering nights I'd sat up with him during his nightmares, reading him stories until he fell back asleep. That boy had deserved my love and care. The man he'd become had earned my disappointment. Marcus, I said softly, you asked for forgiveness. I can't give you that. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I can give you advice, if you want it. Please. Start over. Get a real education this time. Work a real job, even if it's minimum wage. Learn what it means to earn something honestly, to be proud of yourself for legitimate reasons. Maybe someday you'll become someone who deserves forgiveness. But that's work you have to do yourself. Eleanor. Goodbye, Marcus. I hope you find your way. I hung up and turned off my phone. Enough. I'd given this family 25 years. I'd given them my labor, my loyalty, my silence. I'd even given them justice when they tried to destroy me. But I was done giving them my emotional energy. Walter appeared with a glass of wine. To new beginnings, he offered. I clinked my glass against his. To new beginnings, I agreed. And to old friends who show up when it matters most. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No alarm set for 5 a.m. No mentally planning which rooms needed extra attention. No worrying about whether I'd pleased my employers, whether I'd been invisible enough, whether I'd kept their secrets well enough. I was free. And if that freedom came at the cost of burning down the house of cards I'd helped maintain for so many years, well. Sometimes the only way to truly clean something is to tear it down to the studs and start fresh. Tomorrow, I would begin planning my actual future, not the deferred dream of retirement someday, but a real life with real choices. Maybe I'd travel. Maybe I'd spend more time with my daughter and granddaughter. Maybe I'd volunteer somewhere, helping other people who felt invisible and powerless. But tonight, I just savored the quiet. The peace. The knowledge that I had fought for myself and won. The Whitmore mansion stood empty on its hill in Greenwich, a monument to the illusion of perfection. Inside, dust was probably already beginning to settle on surfaces I wasn't there to clean. The grand piano was probably collecting fingerprints I wasn't there to polish away. The secrets were probably still whispering through the vents and hiding in the corners. But I wasn't there to keep them anymore. And somehow, that felt like the greatest victory of all. 3 months later, spring was turning Greenwich green again. The dogwoods were blooming, painting the wealthy suburbs in clouds of white and pink. I'd always loved this time of year, when winter's harshness gave way to something softer, something that promised renewal. I was sitting in my new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in Norwalk, nothing fancy but mine, all mine, when the call came. Detective Morrison's name flashed on my phone screen. Mrs. Hartley, I wanted to give you an update. Catherine Whitmore's trial concluded this morning. I set down my coffee cup, my hands suddenly unsteady. And? Guilty on all counts. Insurance fraud, filing a false police report, perjury. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in federal prison and ordered restitution of $600,000 to the insurance company. She'll also be required to perform community service after her release, 500 hours cleaning public facilities. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Catherine, who'd built her identity on being served, would now be serving. Catherine, who'd thrown me away like trash, would now be collecting it. There's more, Detective Morrison continued. Marcus Whitmore was charged as an accessory after the fact. He took a plea deal, 2 years probation, a $50,000 fine, and mandatory restitution to his former employer for wages earned under false pretenses. And Gregory Whitmore, well, he's cooperating fully with federal investigators looking into the charitable foundation's finances. He won't face criminal charges, but his reputation is destroyed. Last I heard, he'd resigned from every board he served on. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. Mrs. Hartley, can I ask you something off the record? Of course. Do you regret it? Any of it? I looked around my small living room. At the photos of my granddaughter on the mantel. At the bookshelf I'd finally had time to organize. At the view of the park across the street where I walked every morning, not because I had to rush to someone else's house, but because I wanted to. At the peace I'd found in simplicity. Not for a second, I said. After we hung up, I sat with the news, letting it settle into my bones. Justice. Real, tangible justice. Not the kind that rich people bought with expensive lawyers and political connections, but the kind that came from truth being dragged into the light. My daughter, Rachel, was coming over for dinner. She'd been my rock through all of this, offering support without judgment, love without condition. When she arrived with Emma in tow, my beautiful granddaughter, now applying to colleges, I told them about the verdict. Rachel hugged me tight. Mom, I'm so proud of you. For fighting back. For standing up for yourself. I should have done it years ago, I admitted. You did it when you were ready. That's what matters. She pulled back, studying my face. You look different. Lighter, somehow. Emma, sprawled on my couch with the casual confidence of 17, piped up. Grandma looks like a badass. You took down a whole rich family with receipts. That's savage. Emma. Rachel admonished, but she was smiling. It's true though, Emma insisted. All my friends think Grandma's story is like the ultimate revenge plot. You're basically a hero. I laughed, surprised by the warmth spreading through my chest. I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I just refuse to be a victim. That's what makes you a hero, Emma said seriously. You showed that rich people can't just treat workers like garbage and get away with it. My AP government teacher actually used your case as an example when we were studying justice and class inequality. The thought that my personal nightmare had become a teaching moment was surreal. But maybe that was another form of justice, turning pain into purpose, suffering into a story that might help others find their own courage. Over dinner, pasta primavera, Rachel's specialty, we talked about the future. Emma's college plans, Rachel's promotion at work, my own tentative ideas about what came next. I've been thinking, I said slowly, about writing a book. About my experience. Not for revenge or exposure, but to help other domestic workers understand their rights. To show them that they don't have to accept abuse or exploitation. Rachel's eyes lit up. Mom, that's a wonderful idea. You could really make a difference. There's a legal aid organization in New Haven that specializes in domestic worker rights, Emma added, already pulling out her phone. They'd probably love to have you speak to their clients. Share your story. I watched my daughter and granddaughter brainstorm ways to turn my trauma into advocacy, and felt something I hadn't felt in decades, hope. Not the desperate hope of someone clinging to a bad situation, praying it would improve. But real hope, the kind built on solid ground, on knowing your own worth, on refusing to settle for less than you deserve. There's something else, I said when they paused for breath. I want to use some of the settlement money to set up a scholarship. For children of domestic workers who want to go to college. In honor of all the housekeepers, nannies, and caregivers who sacrifice their own families' futures to serve other people's families. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Mom. That's beautiful. I'm calling it the Invisible Workers Scholarship Fund, I continued, the idea solidifying as I spoke. Because we're only invisible if people choose not to see us. And I'm done being invisible. The next week, I had an unexpected visitor. I was in my apartment, working on the first chapter of my book, tentatively titled The Housekeeper's Silence, when the intercom buzzed. "Ms. Hartley? There's a Jennifer Chin here to see you." Jennifer Chen. The name was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it until she stepped into my apartment. Mid-30s, professionally dressed, carrying herself with the careful composure of someone who'd learned to hide her nerves. "Mrs. Hartley, thank you for seeing me. I'm Jennifer Chen. I was Gregory Whitmore's executive assistant for 5 years. The secretary. The one he'd been having an affair with, documented in those careless emails." "Please, sit," I said, curious now. "Can I offer you tea?" "No, thank you. I won't take much of your time." She perched on the edge of my couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I came to thank you. And to apologize." "Apologize?" I knew about the affair. Obviously. But I also knew things were wrong in that family. I saw how Mrs. Whitmore treated you, the few times you called the office. I heard Mr. Whitmore's dismissive comments about the help. I saw the discrepancies in the foundation's accounts when I processed the paperwork. And I said nothing. She looked at me directly, her eyes haunted. I was afraid of losing my job. Of losing the paycheck, the health insurance, the prestige of working for someone powerful. So I made myself small and quiet and complicit. Just like you did for 25 years. Except you finally found the courage to fight back, and I didn't. "Jennifer," I said gently, "you weren't in a position to fight. You would have been fired, blacklisted, your career destroyed. That's how power works, it makes resistance seem impossible. But it's not impossible. You proved that." She pulled an envelope from her purse. "After everything came out, Mr. Whitmore gave me a very generous severance package. Probably guilt money, honestly. I used some of it to hire a lawyer and file a sexual harassment claim against him. We settled out of court. And I wanted you to have this." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a check for $25,000. "Jennifer, I can't." "Yes, you can. You exposed the rot in that family, which gave me the courage to expose the rot in my own situation. This is my contribution to your scholarship fund. For the invisible workers. The ones like us, who do the real work while other people take the credit and the glory." I looked at this young woman who'd been trapped in her own web of complicity and fear, who'd found her way out by following the path I'd cleared. And I understood that my fight hadn't just been for myself. It had been for everyone who'd ever felt powerless, voiceless, invisible. "Thank you," I said, accepting the check. "This will help a lot of people." After Jennifer left, I sat with her gift and thought about the ripples. How one act of defiance can inspire another. How speaking truth to power gives others permission to speak their own truths. How refusing to be a victim can help others recognize their own agency. The book was coming together slowly but surely. I'd found a literary agent, a fierce woman named Samantha who specialized in social justice memoirs, who believed in the project. We had interest from several publishers. My story, it seemed, resonated with a lot of people. But the real work was happening elsewhere. The legal aid organization in New Haven had indeed invited me to speak. Then another organization in New York. Then one in Boston. I found myself traveling up and down the East Coast, talking to domestic workers about their rights, about documentation, about the importance of knowing your worth. At one workshop in Hartford, a young woman raised her hand. She was maybe 30, with tired eyes and calloused hands. "Mrs. Hartley, my employer throws away my food from the fridge. Says it smells bad and makes her buy all organic. She docks my pay if I'm even 5 minutes late but never pays me for staying late. And she goes through my bag every night before I leave, just to be sure. Is that legal? The room had gone silent, everyone waiting for my answer. No, I said firmly. None of that is legal. Food theft, wage theft, illegal search, those are all violations of labor law. And more than that, they're violations of your basic human dignity. I looked around the room at all the faces watching me. Here's what I've learned: the people who have power want you to think you have none. They want you to believe you're lucky to have a job, any job, even one that abuses and exploits you. But that's a lie. You have rights. You have worth. And you have the power to demand better. After the workshop, women lined up to talk to me. To share their stories. To ask for advice. To simply have someone witness their struggles and validate their pain. I listened to tales of wage theft and sexual harassment, of 12-hour days and no days off, of being treated like property instead of people. And I gave them what I wished someone had given me 25 years ago: permission to fight back. Resources to help them do it. And the knowledge that they weren't alone. 6 months after Catherine's conviction, I received an invitation that surprised me. Gregory Whitmore wanted to meet. Not at a coffee shop this time, but at a community center in Bridgeport where he'd started volunteering. I almost declined. I'd gotten my justice, my vindication, my peace. What more could he possibly have to say? But curiosity, and perhaps a desire for closure, made me accept. The community center was humble, a far cry from the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of the Whitmore mansion. Gregory was in the kitchen, of all places, helping prepare meals for a food distribution program. He'd lost weight, I noticed. His expensive suit had been replaced with jeans and a polo shirt. He looked older, yes, but also somehow more present, more real. Eleanor. He set down the ladle he'd been using and came over, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, I admitted. He gestured to a quiet corner of the room, away from the bustle of volunteers. I wanted you to see this. What I'm doing now. Not because I want credit or forgiveness, but because I wanted you to know that your actions, what you did, it changed me. It forced me to confront who I'd become. And who was that? A man who'd forgotten that money and status don't make you better than anyone else. A man who'd let his wife abuse people in his name while he looked the other way. A man who valued comfort over integrity. He met my eyes. I'm trying to be different now. To actually help people instead of just writing checks to feel better about myself. I looked around the community center. At the families waiting for food. At the volunteers working side by side, regardless of their backgrounds. At the simple dignity of people helping other people. Why here? I asked. Why this? Because I wanted to understand what work actually means. What it feels like to serve instead of being served. And because, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Because I wanted to do something that might honor what you did for my family all those years. You served us with dignity even when we didn't deserve it. I'm trying to learn how to serve with dignity too. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough to erase the harm done, the years wasted, the injustice committed. But it was something. A man trying to be better than he'd been. Trying to learn the lessons that suffering had taught him. Gregory, I said slowly, I appreciate you telling me this. And I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for here. But you need to understand, I didn't expose your family to change you. I didn't fight back to teach you a lesson. I did it to save myself. Your redemption, or lack thereof, isn't my concern. He nodded, accepting the boundary I was setting. I understand. But I wanted you to know anyway. That your courage had consequences beyond just justice. it made me look at myself and hate what I saw. And that hate, it motivated me to actually change instead of just feeling guilty. Then I'm glad, I said sincerely. The world needs more people willing to change. To do better. To recognize that wealth and privilege come with responsibilities, not just entitlements. We talked for a while longer. He told me about the divorce, finalized now, Catherine having signed the papers from prison. About Marcus, who was working as a barista and taking online classes to earn a legitimate degree. About his own therapy, his own reckoning with the man he'd been. I told him about my book, my speaking engagements, the scholarship fund that was growing beyond my wildest hopes. About the letters I received from domestic workers who'd found the courage to stand up for themselves because of my story. When I left the community center that day, I felt something unexpected, peace. Not the peace of forgiveness, I hadn't forgiven the Whitmores, and I wasn't sure I ever would. But the peace of completion. Of a chapter closing, a circle completing itself. The book published 8 months later. The housekeeper's silence, one woman's fight for justice against the family she served became, to everyone's surprise including my own, a bestseller. Apparently, a lot of people connected with the story of an invisible woman who refused to stay invisible. I did interviews. National news shows, podcasts, magazine features. Every time, I emphasized the same message: domestic workers are not disposable. They're not less than. They deserve respect, fair wages, and dignity. And when they're denied those things, they have the right, and the power, to demand them. The scholarship fund grew exponentially. Donations poured in from all over the country. The first year, we were able to award scholarships to 5 students. The second year, 20. By the third year, we'd helped 50 young people from domestic worker families attend college. One of those students was a young woman named Maria whose mother had cleaned houses for 30 years. At the scholarship awards ceremony, Maria stood up to speak. "My mother taught me that hard work has dignity," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "But Mrs. Hartley taught me that hard work also deserves respect. That serving others doesn't mean accepting abuse. That being invisible is a choice others make about us, not a truth about who we are. Because of this scholarship, I'm going to study law. And when I graduate, I'm going to fight for workers like my mother. Like Mrs. Hartley. Like all the invisible people who make this world run." The audience erupted in applause. I sat in the front row, crying openly, feeling the weight and wonder of how far one act of defiance had rippled outward. After the ceremony, Rachel and Emma found me in the crowd. "Mom," Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion, "I've always been proud of you. But now the whole world knows what I've always known. That you're extraordinary." Emma hugged me tight. "Grandma, you're literally my hero. I wrote my college essay about you. About how you taught me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." "Did you get in?" I asked, suddenly anxious. Emma's face split into a huge grin. "Full ride to Columbia. I'm going to study social work. Because of you." I held my granddaughter and my daughter close, breathing in the moment. This was success. Not money, though the book royalties and speaking fees had given me financial security I'd never dreamed of. Not fame, though I was regularly recognized now when I walked down the street. But this, knowing that my pain had purpose, that my fight had made the world even slightly better for someone else. The final piece of closure came on a crisp October morning, 3 years after Catherine's arrest. I was at a coffee shop in Norwalk, working on the proposal for my second book, this one about organizing domestic workers and building power collectively, when someone approached my table. "Mrs. Hartley?" I looked up. Marcus Whitmore stood there, looking nothing like the entitled young man who'd watched me be arrested. His hair was shorter, his clothes simple. He carried himself differently, with less arrogance, more caution. Marcus. I gestured to the empty chair. Would you like to sit? He sat gratefully. I wasn't sure you'd talk to me. I wouldn't blame you if you told me to get lost. I'm listening, I said neutrally. I saw your book. Read it, actually. 3 times. He pulled a worn copy from his backpack, its pages dog-eared and highlighted. And I wanted to tell you. I'm sorry. I've said it before, but I don't think I really meant it. Not really. I was sorry I got caught, sorry my life got hard. But I wasn't sorry for what I did to you. And now? Now I understand what I did. What I was part of. I stood there and watched my mother frame you for a crime she committed. I knew you were innocent, and I said nothing. I chose my comfort over your freedom, your reputation, your life. His voice cracked. That's not something you can just apologize for. That's something you have to spend your whole life trying to atone for. I studied him carefully. He looked sincere, but I'd been fooled by the Whitmores before. What do you want from me, Marcus? Absolution? Forgiveness? No. I don't deserve either of those things. He pulled out his phone and showed me something. A website. I started this. It's called Second Chance Credentials. We help adults who have fake degrees, whether they bought them knowingly or were scammed, come clean and earn legitimate credentials. We work with community colleges and online universities to create affordable pathways to real education. I scrolled through the website. Testimonials from people who'd turned their lives around. Partnerships with accredited institutions. A mission statement about redemption and integrity. It's not much, Marcus continued. It doesn't fix what I did or who I was. But it's something. A way to take my own failure and use it to help other people avoid the same mistakes. Why are you showing me this? Because you inspired it. Your book talks about how invisible people often stay invisible because they think they don't have options, don't have power, don't have the education or credentials to fight back. I realized I could help with that last part. Not as some wealthy benefactor feeling good about charity, but as someone who learned the hard way that fake credentials and borrowed prestige aren't the same as real achievement. He closed the website and looked at me directly. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mrs. Hartley. I'm just asking you to know that your courage, it didn't just destroy my family. It also built something new. It gave me a chance to become someone who might actually deserve to take up space in this world. I sat back in my chair, processing this. The boy I'd raised, in a way, had grown into a man. Not the man his parents had intended, that shallow, entitled creature of privilege, but someone real. Someone who'd been broken and was trying to rebuild himself into something better. Marcus, I said finally, I can't give you forgiveness. I'm not there yet, and I may never be. But I can give you acknowledgement. You're doing good work. Keep doing it. Not for me, not to make up for the past, but because it's the right thing to do. He nodded, tears in his eyes. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. After he left, I sat with the encounter, turning it over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by water. Redemption was complicated. Justice was messy. But maybe that was okay. Maybe perfect closure was a myth, and the real work was learning to live with complexity, with partial resolutions, with the understanding that people could change without that change erasing what they'd done. That evening, I video called with Rachel and Emma. We had a standing weekly call now, a ritual I treasured. Mom, you look thoughtful, Rachel observed. What's going on? I told them about Marcus's visit, about his project, about my complicated feelings. Emma, ever practical, said, Grandma, you don't have to forgive him. But you can acknowledge that people grow. Both things can be true. When did you get so wise? I asked, smiling. I had a good teacher, she replied, grinning. After the call ended, I stood at my apartment window, looking out at the city lights. It was a modest view, nothing like the sweeping vistas from the Whitmore mansion. But it was mine. Earned, not granted. Chosen, not endured. I thought about the girl I'd been, decades ago, taking that first housekeeping job because I needed to feed my family. About the woman I'd become, invisible and exhausted, serving people who saw her as furniture. About the moment when invisibility became a choice I refused to accept anymore. And I thought about all the women who were still invisible. Still serving, still suffering, still silent. The domestic workers and caregivers and cleaners who kept the world running while receiving no recognition, no respect, no justice. My phone buzzed. An email from Samantha, my agent. The subject line read, Speaking Invitation, United Nations, International Domestic Workers' Day. I opened it with shaking hands. They wanted me to speak. At the UN. To address an international audience about domestic workers' rights, about dignity and justice, about the power of refusing to be invisible. I sat down on my couch, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought me here. From a holding cell to the United Nations. From invisible servant to visible advocate. From silence to a voice that was being heard around the world. Was I the same person I'd been 3 years ago? No. That woman had been buried under layers of fear and resignation and desperate gratitude for crumbs of dignity. The woman I was now had been forged in fire, tempered by betrayal, strengthened by the fight for justice. But in some ways, I was exactly the same. Still Eleanor Hartley, still a woman who believed in hard work and loyalty and treating people with respect. The difference was that now I demanded that same respect in return. Now I understood that dignity wasn't something to be granted by others but something to be claimed for yourself. I replied to the email, yes. I'll speak. The UN speech was scheduled for June, International Domestic Workers' Day. I spent months preparing, working with organizers from domestic worker unions around the world. I heard stories from women in Singapore, men in Lebanon, families in the Philippines. Invisible workers everywhere, all fighting for the same basic rights, fair wages, reasonable hours, freedom from abuse. My story, I realized, wasn't unique. It was universal. The details differed, but the core remained the same, people with power exploiting people without it, and the constant, grinding battle to be seen as fully human. When the day came, I stood at that podium in the UN General Assembly Hall, looking out at delegates from nations around the world, and I spoke my truth. My name is Eleanor Hartley, I began, my voice steady. 3 years ago, I was arrested for a crime I didn't commit by the family I'd served faithfully for 25 years. Today, I stand before you not as a victim, but as a voice for the 67 million domestic workers worldwide who are still fighting for basic dignity and rights. I told my story. Not for revenge, not for catharsis, but as testimony. As evidence that change was possible, that justice could be won, that invisible people could become visible through courage and solidarity. The family who employed me thought I was invisible because I was quiet, I continued. They thought I was powerless because I needed the job. They thought I would accept injustice because I always had before. They were wrong. And employers around the world who are making the same assumptions about their domestic workers are wrong too. I laid out a vision, international standards for domestic worker rights, enforcement mechanisms to protect vulnerable workers, pathways to citizenship for migrant domestic workers, education and organizing support to help workers understand and claim their rights. We are not asking for charity, I concluded, my voice ringing through that vast hall. We are demanding justice. We are not begging for respect. We are insisting on dignity. And we will no longer accept being invisible. Because we are done being silent. The applause was thunderous. Delegates from dozens of countries approached afterward, wanting to talk, to plan, to coordinate. NGO representatives pressed business cards into my hands. Other domestic workers, some who'd traveled from around the world to be there, embraced me with tears streaming down their faces. "You spoke for all of us," one woman from Ghana told me, gripping my hands. "You gave us words for our pain and hope for our future." That night, alone in my hotel room, I allowed myself to fully feel the magnitude of what had happened. A housekeeper from Connecticut had addressed the United Nations. A woman who'd been arrested and humiliated had become an internationally recognized advocate for justice. Not because I was special or extraordinary. But because I'd refused to accept injustice. Because I'd fought back when fighting back seemed impossible. Because I'd transformed my pain into purpose. My phone rang. Rachel, calling to congratulate me, she'd watched the live stream. "Mom, you were incredible. Powerful and eloquent and just, incredible." I was terrified, I admitted. "You didn't look it. You looked like you were exactly where you belonged." Maybe I was. Maybe the journey from the Whitmores' marble foyer to the UN podium was exactly the path I was meant to walk. Not because it was easy or fair or anything I would have chosen. But because it taught me something essential, that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you treat yourself. 1 year later, I found myself back in Greenwich, Connecticut. Not at the Whitmore mansion, that had been sold, the furniture auctioned, the ghosts dispersed. But at the public library, for the launch of my second book, From Invisible to Invincible, A Guide to Domestic Worker Organizing. The room was packed. Domestic workers, labor organizers, social justice advocates, and yes, former employers who'd read my first book and were trying to do better. At the back of the room, I spotted Jennifer Chen, now running her own employment rights nonprofit. And next to her, looking nervous but determined, was Marcus Whitmore. I gave my talk, answered questions, signed books. And when the official event ended, Marcus approached. "Mrs. Hartley, I wanted you to know, Second Chance Credentials just got a major grant. We're going to be able to help 500 people this year. And we're partnering with the Invisible Workers Scholarship Fund to create a pipeline from our program to higher education." I looked at this man who'd once been complicit in my arrest, who'd grown into someone trying to build instead of destroy. "That's wonderful, Marcus. Truly. I also wanted to give you this." He handed me a sealed envelope. "It's a personal donation to the scholarship fund. I know it doesn't erase anything, but I want to be part of building something better." After he left, I opened the envelope. A check for $50,000. I stared at it, feeling the weight of symbols and gestures, of penance and progress. Rachel appeared at my elbow. "Was that Marcus Whitmore?" "It was. How do you feel about that?" I thought about it honestly. Complicated. But also, hopeful. Maybe people really can change. Maybe justice isn't just about punishment but about creating conditions for everyone to become better. "You've changed too, you know," Rachel said softly. From the woman who was afraid to speak up for herself to someone who speaks up for millions. "I'm still learning," I admitted. Still figuring out how to balance anger and forgiveness, justice and mercy, holding people accountable while allowing room for growth. That's what makes you human, Mom. And what makes your work so powerful. You're not preaching from some moral high ground. You're in the messy middle with the rest of us, trying to figure it out." That night, in my apartment, I added Marcus's check to the scholarship fund. Not because he'd earned forgiveness. Not because money could erase what he'd done. But because the fund wasn't about him or me or our complicated history. It was about young people who deserved a chance. Who deserved to be visible. I sat at my laptop and began working on my third book, this one a memoir about the journey from victim to advocate, about finding voice after decades of silence. The words flowed easily now. I'd learned to tell my truth without apology, to claim my story without shame. The woman I'd been, quiet, fearful, desperate to please, hadn't disappeared entirely. She was still there, in the parts of me that valued hard work and loyalty and doing things right. But she'd been joined by someone stronger. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who refused to be diminished. Outside my window, the city hummed with evening activity. People coming home from work, children playing in the park, life continuing in its beautiful, messy complexity. I was part of that life now. Not watching from the shadows, not serving from the margins, but fully participating. Visible. Valued. Free. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Grandma, guess what? I got accepted to the grad program at Columbia. I'm going to get my MSW and specialize in workers' rights advocacy. Because of you. I love you." I typed back through tears, "I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm so proud of you." Then I set down my phone and returned to my writing. There were more stories to tell, more workers to reach, more injustice to fight. The work would never be finished. But that was okay. Because I'd learned something essential over these years of transformation. You don't have to wait for permission to matter. You don't have to accept someone else's valuation of your worth. And you're never too old, too tired, or too powerless to stand up and say enough. I'd been Eleanor Hartley, invisible housekeeper, for 25 years. Now I was Eleanor Hartley, visible advocate, for however many years I had left. And that made all the difference.